The issue of nuclear weapons development and corresponding justification for self-defense in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is complex and based on a nuanced history. Within the period after the end of the Korean War to today, North Korea has achieved what only a handful of countries have, which is the development of nuclear weapons and even the possibility of the development of a hydrogen bomb. It is important to recognize before noting the typical Western, namely American perspective of paranoia and fear of North Korea possessing such weapons, that the weapons development itself is at least in part a product of fear. North Korea has struggled with asserting its statehood, especially to powers who oppose the fundamental ideology and corresponding existence of it. Realistically, North Korea and its isolationist policies would not care about recognition if there wasn't a threat to sovereignty, given their intentions of self-reliance, also known as juche. This is where the issues of the US comes in, and the core overlooked factor of North Korea's perceptions of its threat. An academic justification for North Korean nuclear development is that it is a reaction to the perceived threat to its sovereignty from US decisions rooting from the Korean War to the present. If the US reacted to and made better communications with North Korea, the path North Korea followed in terms of nuclear development may have differed. Despite the obvious historical events and threatening presence the US established surrounding North Korea, based on North Korean ideology, defiance of international organizations and agreements, and progression of the nuclear program, it can be argued that the North Korean nuclear program exists, partially irrespective of the perceived US threat. In fact, it can also be argued that North Korea uses the US as a scapegoat to justify a program that was inevitable based on the aforementioned reasoning and seen in the North Korean slogan Songun, meaning military first. North Korea spent decades after the Korean War heavily militarized, received financial support from China and the USSR to rebuild infrastructure and establish themselves as an independently governed entity. While North Korea rebuilt their economy and their crippled infrastructure, the US fortified the South. At this point, it had been decades since the Breakthrough Manhattan Project that produced the first nuclear warfare, and given the previous successful use of nuclear bombs in East Asia, the US installed a nuclear arsenal in several locations across South Korea. Tactical nuclear weapons are in the pictures below. Upon first inspection, this appears to be a clear provocation, and it would be difficult to argue this did not contribute to North Korean retaliation, but the issue is more complex. In the mid-50s and into the 60s, Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korean state and leader of the time, referred to Moscow about nuclear technology. Moscow declined directly supplying nuclear technology to North Korea, but offered support in developing nuclear research and development within North Korea. In 1965, North Korea, with the aid of the USSR, constructed Yongbyon Nuclear Scientific Research Center, pictured on the right. In 1986, North Korea started development on a 5-megawatt nuclear reactor at Yongbyon. Multiple attempts at nuclear disarming treaties from the US resulted in fallouts, with North Korea leading to George Bush labeling the country as evil in 2002. The argument that the US is at fault for much of the nuclear developments in North Korea is not unfounded. In fact, numerous occasions beginning at North Korea's independence to the present support this. In 1953, the US triggered the signing of the Armistice Agreement that forced both the North Korean and Chinese forces to enter into a ceasefire and some level of peace with an established border. This agreement was in limbo for some time, and the North Korean side notably was reluctant. This reluctance and sudden agreement has garnered significant suspicion that John Foster Dulles, pictured here, who served as the US Secretary of State, threatened nuclear use. In 1958 and 1959, the US installed tactical nuclear weapons at Osan Air Base and at a stockpile near the DMZ. All of the aforementioned aligned with Kim Il-sung's request to the Soviets for nuclear weapons. This indication is often brought up as evidence for fear for the development of nuclear weapons as retaliation and defense rather than implicitly for conflict. This is especially true given a notable 1986 quote from Kim Il-sung. North Korea does not intend to attack, nor could it. More than 1,000 US nuclear warheads are stored in South Korea, ostensibly for defense, and it would take only 2 of them to destroy the North. Kim Il-sung, who stated the aforementioned, is pictured on the right, while Osan Air Base is pictured on the left. While America appears to have to some degree propagated North Korea's desire for nuclear deterrence in the 50s and 60s, it was the Bush administration of the early 2000s that quashed the final diplomatic attempt by the US to shut down North Korea's nuclear program. Bill Clinton's Democratic government in 1994 developed what was known as the Agreed Framework, which claimed to shut down the generator at Yongbyon and replace it with 2 light water reactor power plants, pictured in the bottom right corner, that would be imported from South Korea, as well as additional US support in the form of oil imports during this process. Ultimately, the agreement was shot down in 2001 when George W. Bush refused US engagement after the South Korean President Kim Dae-jung attempted to initiate putting the plan into action. Bush dismissed the issue by deeming North Korea as an unreliable partner, resetting US-DPRK relations. In the image here, South Korean leader is pictured with George W. Bush. The argument for North Korea's autonomous decisions rather than US-propagated decisions to develop nukes lies in what the Australian Journal of International Affairs refers to as the Hawke hypothesis, as opposed to the Dove hypothesis, which supports many of the aforementioned external reasons. The freezing of North Korea's plutonium program happened in accordance with the transfer of power between Kim Il-sung after his death in 1994 and Kim Jong-il, where the agreed framework was signed. This could be argued to be exclusively caused by increased external pressure, but in reality, based on Kim Il-sung's long reign of Songun, this indicates a shift in opinion leader to leader. Another reason for the nuclear program that is internal, according to the Hawke hypothesis, is the idea that North Korea uses the nuclear program as a means of extortion to get trade and appeasement grants. This is indicated once again by the 1994 agreed framework, where they would massively benefit from American and South Korean appeasement. Furthermore, post-cancellation of the agreed framework, North Korea pushed forward with further nuclear weapons tests until, in 2006, North Korea launched its first successful nuclear weapon. The mass of the weapon was minimal compared to that of its American and Russian counterparts, but it remained a massive breakthrough for North Korean technology. Under George W. Bush, further negotiations with North Korea began. Under what was called the 6PT, which held multilateral negotiations through China alongside South Korea, Japan, and Russia, these negotiations made a breakthrough from 2005 to 2007, when North Korea suggested it would freeze its nuclear weapons program if the US signaled a non-aggression pact, gave the light water reactor suggested in the 90s, and returned frozen funds from a Macau bank the US argued were initially laundered illegally by North Korea. Eventually, these demands were met alongside the funneling of 1 million tons of fuel. This is yet another example of North Korean extortion and successful use of nuclear weapons as leverage in international negotiations. In conclusion, North Korea's nuclear development in the period post-Korean War to the present is complex and multifaceted in terms of justification with other countries, namely the US playing a part. Regardless, based on the Hawke hypothesis, it is justifiable that North Korea's decisions are also somewhat independent. This is clear from the North Korean military slogan Songun, certain North Korean leaders' attitudes, the benefits of being able to use the nuclear card as leverage in international relations, and ultimate security for the nation. While the US perceived threat simultaneously digs deeper than the aforementioned, it does not act alone but rather acts as a catalyst for North Korea's long-term goals. At each point of US aggression or neglect to diplomacy, North Korea has advanced to a further stage in nuclear development. When the US armed South Korea against the Armistice Agreement's terms, North Korea began nuclear inquiry. When American strategic attack plans advanced, North Korea developed a research facility and an active nuclear generator. And when the US under George Bush neglected the agreed framework, North Korea was emboldened to get the US attention and expand its program, eventually to real nuclear weapons. Ultimately, a combination of fear, US aggression, and perception of threat, culture of nationalism and militarization, and viewing of nuclear technology as a means of leverage in negotiations led North Korea to its current position as one of only 9 nuclear-armed nations.